Subscribe now and turn on the bell so you never miss a story. Let's get started. I gave my daughter a house as a wedding gift, thinking her marriage would be a joyous celebration, a milestone to cherish. Elegant, beautiful, everything a mother could hope for. But before the wedding even took place, her so-called in-laws arrived. Not just the groom, Curtis Miller, but his entire family, his parents, his brother, and his sister-in-law. They showed up with suitcases in hand as if they had already moved in. And the first thing out of his mother's mouth? "We'll take the master bedroom. And Natalie? She can handle the chores." I had to stop myself from laughing in disbelief. I thought this was going to be a marriage. But to them? My daughter was nothing more than a live-in maid. Natalie, my only daughter, had been in love with Curtis for years. Stubbornly, foolishly in love. She had pleaded and convinced us that he was the one. I had my doubts. Curtis seemed decent, polite, well-mannered, but his background was troubling. No house. No car. No financial contribution to the wedding. His parents were farmhands in a rural town, barely scraping by. His brother and sister-in-law jumped from one odd job to another. Still, Natalie was determined. So Thomas, my husband, and I decided that if she was going to marry, she would at least have stability. We gifted her a beautiful, fully renovated home in the Boston suburbs, a modern, elegant house, custom-designed, every detail handpicked. Thomas personally oversaw the renovations, pouring hundreds of thousands into the project. On the day it was finally completed, he was so excited that he dragged me there to see it one last time before handing the keys to Natalie. But as we arrived, a shrill voice echoed through the halls. "My God! This neighborhood feels like a prison! Why are all the doors shut? How am I supposed to visit the neighbors?" The voice was unmistakable. Mrs. Miller. Curtis's mother. I froze in place, my stomach tightening. Curtis's mother was already standing in the middle of my daughter's house, her arms crossed, her lips pursed in distaste. Her eyes darted around, scrutinizing the house like she was inspecting a rundown motel. "This front gate. What the hell is that? It looks like a damn fortress. Bars locked up so tight, like we're guarding a bank. Curtis, tell them to remove this nonsense. Our relatives will visit often. Are they supposed to wait outside like beggars?" I turned to Thomas. His jaw clenched. I had expected gratitude. Instead, criticism. Entitlement. Disrespect. Curtis's father appeared next, his eyes lazily scanning the kitchen. Not bad. He shrugged. Good-sized counters. But why didn't you get marble? That'd look classier. He plopped down on a brand-new white leather sofa, dragging his muddy boots across the pristine floor. Natalie tried to keep the peace. "There's a wonderful community center nearby if you're looking for social events." Mrs. Miller wrinkled her nose. "Game nights? Pfft. We don't need to be babysat, dear. But since we'll be living here now, I suppose I'll just have to adjust." Living here? I inhaled sharply. They weren't just visiting. They planned to stay. Curtis's parents and brother wandered off, inspecting rooms, acting as if they already owned the place. I followed them upstairs, every step filling me with dread. Then, the moment that pushed me over the edge, Mrs. Miller sprawled across the master bedroom bed, her shoes still on, leaving dirt smeared across the crisp, brand-new sheets. And Mr. Miller? Lit a cigarette. Inside my daughter's new home. Before I could stop him, he pressed the burning tip against the solid wood nightstand, snuffing it out as if it were an ashtray. A dark charred mark appeared on the polished surface. Thomas's fist clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Natalie looked horrified, nudging Curtis desperately, silently begging him to do something. But Curtis? He lowered his head. Didn't say a word. And then Mr. Miller stretched, letting out a satisfied sigh. "This room is perfect. We'll take it." I snapped my head toward him. "Excuse me?" Mr. Miller stood up, looking at Curtis. "Call your brother. Tell him to cancel his lease. He and Jenna should move in immediately. This house is big enough for all of us." Then, as if it was already settled, he continued. "We'll put the house in Travis's name. That way, little Luca will have a stable home when he starts school." I felt my last shred of patience snap. "You will do no such thing." My voice came out sharp, firm, like a blade cutting through the air. But before I could continue, Thomas gripped my wrist, giving me a small shake of his head. He wanted to see if Natalie could stand up for herself. If she couldn't set boundaries now, what future could she possibly have with this family? I exhaled sharply, turning to Curtis. The boy who once seemed respectful, well-mannered in our presence now looked like a puppet without strings. He stood there, head bowed, spine curled inward. Silent. Weak. Then Natalie spoke. Her voice was cold. Steady. Unshakable. This house was a gift from my parents. It is not a boarding house for your entire family. Don't you think you're crossing the line? The room tensed. Mr. Miller's expression darkened, a puff of smoke shooting aggressively from his nostrils. Your house? He scoffed. You really think this place belongs to you? This is my son's home, which means it's our home. He took a slow step forward, voice dripping with condescension. And you have the nerve to talk back to your future father-in-law? Before you're even married? What, planning to throw us out once you've got a ring on your finger? A slow smirk spread across his face. Let's be real here, sweetheart. If you didn't have this house, you think my son would have even considered marrying you? I saw it then. The moment Natalie snapped. Her fists curled at her sides. Her voice sharp as ice. If you want a house in the city, if you want to be taken care of, pay for it yourselves. Stop expecting my parents to hand you everything. A thick, uncomfortable silence crashed over the room. And then Mrs. Miller hissed, her face twisting in pure fury. Curtis, are you hearing this? This is the woman you're about to marry, talking like we're some kind of beggars. Curtis finally lifted his head, his face pale. His voice came out uneasy, desperate. Natalie, you can't say things like that. Apologize to my parents. Natalie's sharp gaze locked onto him. Her voice was steel. If you actually believe that, then take your parents and get out of my house. And just like that, everything changed. Curtis's face paled, his mouth opening and closing as if he were searching for the right words, but nothing came out. His mother, however, was far from speechless. Mrs. Miller let out a sharp, derisive laugh, the sound grating against the walls like nails on a chalkboard. You ungrateful little girl, she spat, stepping forward. After everything my son has done for you, you have the nerve to throw us out like trash? Do you think we need your charity? Do you think we? I don't think. Natalie cut her off, her voice dangerously calm. I know. She took a step closer, eyes locked onto Curtis. You and I both know exactly what this arrangement was. I loved you, Curtis. I thought you were a good man, that we could build something together. But now I see, I was never your future. I was just a convenient investment. Curtis flinched as if she had slapped him. Natalie, please. You're overreacting. My parents just... No. She held up a hand, stopping him. They didn't just do anything. They came here and made it clear what they think of me, what they think of my family. And you stood there and let them. She let her gaze sweep over him, something cold and final settling in her tone. I would rather be alone than be with a man who doesn't have a spine. Mrs. Miller's face twisted in fury. Curtis, do you hear her? She's turning into one of those spoiled, high-maintenance city girls. She's too selfish to be a wife. I'm not selfish. Natalie interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. I just refuse to be used. A tense silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken words and simmering resentment. Mr. Miller, who had been silent up until now, exhaled a long puff of smoke, shaking his head in disappointment. Guess she's not wife material after all. He muttered under his breath. No respect, no humility. No wonder she's throwing a tantrum. That did it. Before I could stop myself, I stepped forward, my voice low and steady but carrying the full weight of my fury. How dare you? I said, each word sharp as glass. You walked into my daughter's home, our home, without contributing a single dime, a single effort, and you have the audacity to insult her? Mr. Miller scoffed. We're family now. Or at least, we were supposed to be. Families share. That's how it works. No. Thomas spoke for the first time since this all started, his voice eerily calm. Families respect each other. They don't take without asking. They don't make demands when they have offered nothing in return. And they sure as hell don't treat their sons-in-law's homes like their own personal retirement plan. Curtis looked between us, his face growing paler by the second. Look, I know my parents can be forward, he said weakly. But they mean well. They just want to help. They... No, Curtis, Natalie snapped. They want to leech. And you? You're either too weak or too complicit to stop them. Curtis stiffened, his face hardening. That's not fair. Fair? Natalie let out a bitter laugh. Do you want to talk about fair? Fine. Let's be fair. She turned, walking toward the sleek coffee table in the living room, where a neatly prepared document folder lay. Without hesitation, she picked it up, flipping through the pages before turning to Curtis. This is the deed to this house. You see whose name is on it? Curtis's lips pressed together. My name, she said before he could answer. Not yours. Not your parents'. Mine. She took a step forward, holding the document up. And since we're being fair, let's make something else clear. This engagement. It's over. Mrs. Miller gasped. You can't. I can. Natalie's voice was firm. And I am. Curtis took a deep breath, raking a hand through his hair. Natalie, don't do this. We've been together for years. We can work this out. No, Curtis. Her voice wavered, just slightly, but she stood firm. I was blind before. I ignored all the red flags. I excused the little things. But not anymore. She took another deep breath. I deserve better than this. I deserve better than you. A heavy silence followed. Mrs. Miller looked furious. Mr. Miller's expression was unreadable. Curtis just stared at her, something almost desperate in his eyes. So that's it? He asked. You're just throwing me away like I never meant anything? Natalie swallowed hard, pain flickering across her face for just a moment before it was replaced with something colder, something final. No, she said softly. I'm letting you go because you never meant enough to fight for me. Curtis staggered back as if the words physically hit him. For the first time that evening, he looked lost. I took a deep breath, stepping beside my daughter. You need to leave, I said, looking straight at the Millers. Now. Mrs. Miller clenched her jaw. You'll regret this, she hissed at Natalie. My son could have had any woman he wanted. Girls would line up for him. Natalie simply smiled. Then I suggest he goes and finds one of them. With that, she turned her back on them. And just like that, the Millers had lost. Curtis stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as if he wanted to say something, but the words never came. His parents, however, were far from silent. Mrs. Miller's face twisted in rage, her hands balling into fists as she let out a bitter, condescending laugh. You think you're better than us, don't you? She sneered. You think just because your parents have money, that gives you the right to look down on us. Well, let me tell you something, little girl, marriage is about sharing. And once you marry my son, everything that's yours becomes his. Which means it's ours. Natalie didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, she slowly lifted the property deed in her hand and held it up for all of them to see. I'm sorry, she said, voice dripping with icy composure. You seem to be under the impression that this house belongs to Curtis. But let's be very clear, this house is mine. Not his. And not yours. Mr. Miller, who had been lazily puffing on his cigarette, let out a low, humorless chuckle. Is that so? He mused, exhaling a long plume of smoke. And what happens when you get married? You think my boy won't have a claim to it? He tapped the ashes against the expensive wooden nightstand, another small burn mark forming where the embers touched. That's how marriage works, sweetheart. What's yours is his, and what's his? He smirked, looking around the lavishly furnished room. Well, it looks like he doesn't have to bring much to the table, does he? Natalie's grip on the papers tightened, her knuckles turning white. I could see the way her breath hitched for just a second, the way her nails dug into the thick parchment of the deed. But then, just as quickly, she let out a breath and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was razor-sharp, cool, and deliberate. Good thing I'm not marrying him, then, she said flatly. The room went silent. Curtis's head snapped toward her, his eyes widening in horror. Natalie, wait. No. She cut him off, turning her full attention to him now. I've waited long enough, Curtis. I waited when your mother insulted me the first time I met her. I waited when you let your father talk down to me like I was some brainless child. I waited when you let them make plans for our future like I was just a passenger in my own life. And I waited when they walked into my house, and claimed it as theirs while you stood there and said nothing. She took a step closer, her voice dangerously steady. I will not wait anymore. Curtis's hands trembled slightly. Come on, babe. You don't mean that. Yes, she said, her voice like steel. I do. Mrs. Miller let out a sharp, indignant gasp. You little. Enough. I snapped, stepping forward. This conversation is over. You are not welcome in this house. Get out. Mr. Miller scoffed, flicking his cigarette to the floor as he stood up. So that's how it is, huh? He rolled his shoulders back, his posture shifting into something menacing. You think we're just gonna walk out of here like a bunch of losers? Thomas stepped forward now, his voice low and firm. I don't think. I know. And I suggest you start moving before I make you. There was a beat of silence where I swear I could feel the temperature in the room drop. Then, with a loud scoff, Mr. Miller smirked and threw up his hands. Fine. Have it your way. Mrs. Miller, fuming, stormed toward the door, grabbing Curtis by the arm and yanking him along. You'll regret this, she hissed, glaring at Natalie. My son could have any woman he wants. You think you're irreplaceable? You'll end up alone. Natalie simply smiled. I'd rather be alone than be part of this family. That was the final nail in the coffin. The Millers left, slamming the door behind them so hard that the walls rattled. Natalie stood still for a moment, staring at the door as the tension in the air slowly bled away. Then, finally, she let out a long breath and turned to face me. "I'm sorry," she murmured, voice shaking slightly. I frowned, stepping forward to cup her face gently. "For what?" "For everything," she whispered. "For not seeing it sooner. For making you go through all of this." I shook my head, pulling her into a tight hug. "No, baby. Don't you dare apologize. You saw the truth when you were ready to see it. And now?" I pulled back, looking into her eyes. "Now you're free." She let out a soft, shaky laugh, nodding. "Yeah," she whispered. "I am. But if I thought that was the end of it, I was wrong. Because Curtis? He wasn't done yet." Natalie thought she had ended it. That when she closed the door on Curtis and his parasitic family, they would slink away in disgrace, nursing their bruised egos in silence. She thought they would cut their losses and move on. But she had underestimated them. She had underestimated how much they believed they were entitled to her life, her home, her future. And most of all, she had underestimated how much Curtis hated losing. It started small, as most petty revenges do. A few texts at first, one she ignored. Then emails. Voicemails. The messages were all the same, pleading, apologizing, making promises he had no intention of keeping. "We can fix this, Nat." I was caught off guard. I didn't mean to let them say those things. I just need a little time to get them to understand. She ignored them. Then the messages changed. "I don't know why you're acting like this. You're overreacting. My parents were just excited. It wasn't a big deal." She ignored those too. And then? They changed again. "You think you can just throw me away? After everything I did for you?" And then, finally, the last one before she blocked his number completely. "You owe me, Natalie. And I will get what I'm owed." She didn't think much of it at the time. She assumed it was just a wounded ego, a last grasp for control. She had no idea what was coming. A week later, Curtis sent her an invoice. A literal, itemized invoice. She stared at it in disbelief, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine in one hand, her phone in the other, scrolling through the insultingly detailed spreadsheet he had attached. Line by line, every expense he had ever paid for during their relationship was accounted for. Tuesday Starbucks, 2 coffees, $11.80. Valentine's Day flowers, $1.20. Uber ride last weekend, $14. Dinner out, 12 times total, $1,770. Split evenly your half, $885. And at the bottom, bolded and highlighted. Total, $2,897.36. She read it twice, her brain struggling to comprehend the sheer audacity. Then, as the absurdity of it all sank in, she laughed. A deep, disbelieving laugh, shaking her head as she scrolled back up. He had kept track of everything. Every coffee, every meal, every Uber ride. Like she was a business investment he expected a return on. She set her wine glass down, pressing her fingers to her temples as she let out a slow breath. "Oh, Curtis. You really don't know who you're messing with." That night, she transferred every single cent. $2,897.36. Then, she wrote a short, simple email. "Paid in full. You now have no reason to contact me again. Consider this the last message you'll ever receive from me." And she blocked his email. For a moment, she thought that was the end of it. But then she remembered something. She sat back in her chair, a slow smile curling at her lips as she picked up her phone and opened her own banking records. Because if Curtis wanted to talk about fairness, about what was owed, then he had another thing coming. She spent the next hour going through every single expense she had ever covered for him. Every dinner. Every trip. Every time she had pulled out her credit card when he conveniently forgot his wallet. And unlike him, she didn't just tally up petty $11 coffee runs. No, she included the big things. The iPhone she had bought him for his birthday? $1,200. The $1,500 she had given him when his father had a medical emergency? The concert tickets she had surprised him with? The high-end watch she had gifted him for their anniversary? By the time she was done, her own invoice came out to over $15,000. And the best part? She had receipts for all of it. She took a screenshot of the total, attached it to an email, and with a single subject line, "Since we're settling debts," she sent it to his work email. She didn't expect him to actually pay it, of course. She knew Curtis well enough to know he would never take responsibility. But that wasn't the point. The point was to make him panic. And that worked perfectly. Because 2 days later, she got a text from an unknown number. "Are you insane? You can't just bill me for gifts. That's not how this works." She smiled, deleting the message without responding. And then, the next morning, she woke up to something even better. Her friend, who worked at the same firm as Curtis, sent her a screenshot from their company's internal chat. Curtis had forgotten to log out of his work email when he had a full-blown meltdown in the office, yelling about her fraudulent invoice. And his boss had seen the entire thing. By noon, Curtis's LinkedIn status quietly changed to seeking new opportunities. Natalie sat back, sipping her coffee, feeling lighter than she had in months. But if she thought Curtis had finally learned his lesson, if she thought he would finally leave her alone, she was wrong. Because the next time she heard from him, it wasn't from him at all. It was from his mother. Natalie had expected Curtis to crawl away in humiliation after losing his job. She had expected him to finally let go, to lick his wounds and disappear from her life like a bad stain washed clean. But she had underestimated one thing: his mother. Mrs. Miller was not the type of woman to accept defeat, not when she believed that everything Natalie had should rightfully belong to her son. So, when Curtis failed to get what he wanted through financial games, she decided it was her turn to step in. It started at Natalie's workplace. The receptionist at her office buzzed her desk one afternoon, her voice hesitant. "Natalie, there's a woman here to see you. She says it's urgent." Natalie frowned. "A client?" The receptionist hesitated. "She didn't say. But she's being very insistent." Something in her gut twisted. "What's her name?" There was a pause before the answer came, and when it did, Natalie felt her blood turn cold. "Mrs. Miller." Natalie closed her eyes for a long second, inhaled sharply, then exhaled. "Tell her I'm unavailable." The receptionist murmured an apology to the visitor before cutting the call, and for a brief moment, Natalie thought that would be the end of it. She was wrong. Because not even 5 minutes later she heard it. A sharp, piercing voice rising from the lobby. "Excuse me. I want to speak to a manager. This is completely unprofessional." Natalie's stomach dropped. She didn't even have to look, she knew exactly what was happening. Mrs. Miller had decided to cause a scene. The woman's voice carried through the building like a siren, shrill and full of indignation. "I'm here because my son's ex-fiancée is refusing to settle her financial obligations. She owes my son money. Thousands of dollars. And she thinks she can just ignore it?" Murmurs rippled through the office. Employees peeked around corners. A few had even gathered near the front desk, watching the commotion unfold with barely concealed intrigue. Natalie clenched her jaw, gripping the edge of her desk so tightly her knuckles went white. She had dealt with unreasonable clients, aggressive negotiations, corporate sharks. But nothing had prepared her for a grown woman throwing a tantrum in her place of work. For a brief second, she considered calling security. But then she changed her mind. No. If Mrs. Miller wanted an audience, then Natalie would make sure she got the full show. Calmly, she stood up, straightened her blouse, and stepped out of her office. The moment her heels clicked against the tile, all eyes snapped to her. Mrs. Miller spotted her instantly, her expression twisting into something vindictive and triumphant. "There you are," she sneered, folding her arms. "I see you're too much of a coward to face me unless I make a scene." Natalie didn't take the bait. Instead, she tilted her head, her tone perfectly composed. "Mrs. Miller," she said smoothly, "I'm surprised to see you here. But then again, I suppose I shouldn't be." The older woman narrowed her eyes. "You think you can just walk away from my son without consequences? You think you can humiliate him, cost him his job, and just move on like nothing happened?" Natalie arched an eyebrow. "Your son lost his job because he threw a tantrum at work. That's hardly my fault." Mrs. Miller's face reddened. "Don't act innocent. You're the reason he snapped in the first place. You sent him a fake invoice trying to scam him for money." Natalie smiled. "Oh, you mean the exact same thing he did to me?" She folded her arms. "Funny. When he sent me an invoice demanding nearly $3,000 for coffee and cheap dinners, you didn't seem to have a problem with it. But the moment I remind him of the 15 grand I covered for him, suddenly it's a scam?" A few of the nearby employees gasped quietly. A few others snickered. Mrs. Miller's face contorted, realizing too late that she was the one making her son look like a fool. Her voice rose in pitch, shrill with anger. "That money was gifts? You can't just demand it back like some kind of... Oh, so gifts don't have to be repaid?" Natalie cut her off, feigning confusion. "Because that's not what your son seemed to think when he tried to charge me for a cup of coffee." The employees behind her laughed openly now. Mrs. Miller's hands shook. "You little..." "Mrs. Miller," Natalie interrupted, her tone deadly calm now. "I have been more than patient. I have ignored your calls. I have blocked your son's number. I have paid him every cent he demanded, and then some. And yet, here you are, standing in my workplace, screaming like a lunatic." A murmur spread through the crowd. You are humiliating yourself, Natalie said, her voice soft, but sharp as a blade. And more importantly, you're embarrassing him. That landed. Mrs. Miller faltered, her rage warring with something else, something uglier. Fear. Because she knew Natalie was right. She had overplayed her hand. And just as the first flicker of realization crossed her face, a new voice joined the conversation. A deep, unimpressed voice. Excuse me, ma'am. The building's head of security had arrived. Is there a reason you're harassing one of our employees? He asked, arms crossed. Or should I call the police? Mrs. Miller blanched. For the first time, she looked around and saw what everyone else saw. A hysterical woman causing a scene in a corporate office. A mother so desperate to control her son's ex-fiancé that she was willing to make a fool of herself in public. Mrs. Miller swallowed hard, glancing between Natalie and the guard. And then, slowly, she straightened her spine. She lifted her chin, looking at Natalie with as much venom as she could muster. You'll regret this, she hissed. I promise you. Natalie smiled. I'll take my chances. And with that, Mrs. Miller turned and stormed out of the building. The moment the doors shut behind her, the tension broke. A ripple of laughter and murmured conversation spread through the lobby as people returned to their work, shaking their heads at the ridiculous spectacle they had just witnessed. Natalie let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing. But something told her this wasn't over yet. Because Curtis? He was his mother's son. And men like him? They didn't know when to quit. Curtis had lost everything, his fiancée, his job, and what little dignity he had left after his mother's disastrous public meltdown at Natalie's office. Any sane person would have cut their losses and moved on. But Curtis? Curtis wasn't just any man. He was a man who had spent his entire life expecting things to be handed to him. He was a man who had been raised by parents who believed that if they wanted something, they just had to push hard enough, manipulate well enough, and take it. And now, for the first time in his life, he had nothing. And that made him dangerous. At first, Natalie thought the worst was over. After the incident at her office, there was silence. No more calls. No more emails. No more random encounters with Curtis or his mother. It was as if they had finally disappeared from her life. She allowed herself to breathe again, to relax. Then, one evening, she received a message from a friend. Just a short text. Hey, have you seen this? Attached was a screenshot of a social media post. The account name was anonymous, but the contents made it abundantly clear who was behind it. The post read, There are gold diggers, and then there's Natalie Dawson. A woman who thinks she can buy love, who bribes men to stay with her, and when they leave, she makes sure to ruin their lives. A real-life manipulator, a woman who used her family's money to control her fiancé, only to throw him away when he no longer suited her. Beware of women like her, they destroy good men. Below the caption were carefully edited screenshots, private messages that had been doctored to twist the truth. A photo of Natalie and Curtis together cropped in a way that made it seem as if she had been the one clinging onto him. A screenshot of a bank transfer from Natalie to Curtis, with no context, making it seem as if she had been the one paying him off for something. A fabricated narrative, carefully curated to make Natalie look like a manipulative, heartless woman who used men and discarded them. Natalie's blood ran cold. Because this wasn't just a petty post. It was a character assassination. And it was going viral. She immediately called her friend. Where did you find this? Her friend's voice was hesitant. It's been making rounds in a few private forums. Someone's sharing it around, trying to spread it. I saw a couple of people from work talking about it. Natalie's hands clenched into fists. Curtis. It had to be him. He wasn't just trying to get back at her. He was trying to destroy her reputation, to make her unhireable, to make her a pariah. For a split second, fear curled in her stomach. She had worked so hard to build a name for herself, to establish herself as someone competent, professional, and trustworthy. If this lie spread far enough, it could tarnish everything she had built. But then, just as quickly as the fear had come, it burned away. Because if Curtis thought she was just going to sit back and take this, he was out of his goddamn mind. She pulled up her contacts, and called the one person she knew would have the solution. A lawyer. The next morning, Curtis woke up to an official legal notice in his inbox. It was short and brutal. Asterisk. Mr. Curtis Miller. It has come to our attention that defamatory content regarding our client, Ms. Natalie Dawson, has been shared online through anonymous accounts. Please be advised that the fabrication and dissemination of false statements that damage our client's personal and professional reputation constitute defamation under state law. We hereby demand the immediate removal of all false statements and manipulated content associated with our client. Furthermore, we are requesting all IP and account data linked to the original posts for potential legal proceedings. Failure to comply within 24 hours will result in further legal action, including, but not limited to, a civil lawsuit for defamation and damages. This is your only warning. Sincerely, Foster and Lane Legal Associates. Asterisk. Curtis stared at the email, his face draining of color. He had never expected Natalie to fight back. He had assumed she would be too scared, too humiliated to do anything about it. And yet, here she was, not just defending herself, but coming at him with full legal force. He quickly logged into the anonymous account he had used to post the accusations, his hands shaking as he deleted everything. But it was too late. Because Natalie had already traced the account's activity. Within hours, Natalie's legal team had gathered enough evidence to not only prove that Curtis was behind the smear campaign, but also that he had attempted to spread the false information to her professional network. And she wasn't done yet. While Curtis scrambled to delete his posts, Natalie did something far more effective. She took control of the narrative. She wrote a post of her own. It was simple, direct, and devastating. Asterisk. It has come to my attention that false accusations regarding my character and my past relationship have been circulating online. These claims are not only fabricated, but they were intentionally designed to damage my professional reputation. I have always believed that when relationships end, people should part ways with dignity. Unfortunately, not everyone shares that belief. I will not stand by while my name is dragged through the mud by someone who cannot accept accountability for their own actions. To those who have supported me, thank you. And to those who think they can manipulate the truth to serve their own agenda, this is your only warning. Legal action is already underway. Asterisk. The response was immediate. Her colleagues, her friends, and even strangers who had witnessed the viral accusations rallied behind her. People who had known Curtis in real life started speaking up. Wait, isn't this the same guy who got fired for a meltdown at work? I went to college with him. Dude was always mooching off his girlfriends. I can confirm Natalie is one of the hardest working professionals I've ever met. This is pure jealousy, nothing more. The tide turned against Curtis so quickly that within a single day, he went from trying to destroy Natalie's reputation to being publicly humiliated himself. And then? He made his biggest mistake yet. He sent Natalie one last email. A pathetic, desperate attempt at guilt-tripping her one last time. Natalie, please. You don't have to do this. I was angry, okay? I didn't think it would get this bad. You know I'm struggling. You know I have nothing left. Just drop this. Let it go. We can both move on. She stared at the email. Then, she forwarded it to her lawyer. And the lawsuit proceeded. By the time everything was over, Curtis was finished. Not only did the legal case force him to publicly retract his statements, but his name was now permanently linked to online defamation. No respectable employer would touch him. No one wanted to be associated with a man who had tried to destroy his ex-fiancée's career out of spite. Meanwhile, Natalie came out stronger than ever. By standing her ground, she not only protected her reputation, but she showed everyone watching that she was not someone to be messed with. Curtis had tried to ruin her. Instead, he had ruined himself. And the best part? Natalie didn't even have to do anything beyond tell the truth. Because at the end of the day, Curtis's biggest enemy was always himself. Natalie had spent months being on the defensive, enduring Curtis's manipulation, fending off his family's entitlement, fighting back against his smear campaign. She had been dragged into their chaos, forced to protect herself from attacks she never provoked. But now, the tide had turned. She was no longer the woman escaping the damage Curtis caused. She was the woman rising from the wreckage, stronger, smarter, and untouchable. And Curtis? Curtis had already lost. He just hadn't realized how permanent his defeat truly was. It started subtly, in ways he couldn't immediately notice. At first, it was just whispers, among mutual acquaintances, on professional networks, in social circles where his name used to carry weight. People who had once given him the benefit of the doubt now saw the full picture. His tantrums, his entitlement, his complete inability to take responsibility for his own failures, they weren't just one-off mistakes. They were a pattern, a reflection of who he really was. No one wanted to be associated with him. No one wanted to take a chance on a man who had not only been fired but publicly humiliated for trying to destroy his ex-fiancée's career out of spite. Opportunities disappeared overnight. Job interviews that once seemed like guarantees vanished. Connections that might have helped him rebuild burned to the ground. And while Curtis scrambled to repair his crumbling reputation, Natalie was thriving. Because unlike him, she didn't have to lie or manipulate her way forward. She earned her success. For years, Natalie had worked behind the scenes, always holding herself back just a little, afraid of overshadowing Curtis, afraid of making him feel less than. She had downplayed her intelligence, had softened her ambition to keep the peace. She had let him believe that they were equals, that his presence in her life was somehow a contribution rather than a burden. But now, she had nothing left to hold her back. With Curtis out of her life, she threw herself into her career without hesitation, without compromise. She took on bigger projects, riskier deals, leadership roles that she had once avoided because they might make Curtis feel insecure. And almost instantly, her professional life skyrocketed. She wasn't just good at what she did. She was exceptional. People noticed. Her bosses. Her colleagues. Industry leaders. Even competitors. She was invited to exclusive business conferences, asked to speak at panels about leadership and corporate strategy. Her LinkedIn inbox overflowed with job offers from firms that had once ignored her. And one day, she received a personal invitation to a high-profile business summit, one attended by CEOs, investors, and some of the most influential names in the industry. A summit where Curtis would have killed to be invited. And Natalie? She would be one of the keynote speakers. Curtis heard about her success through whispers first, then through mutual contacts, then through headlines. He saw her name appear in business magazines, read about her accomplishments in articles that should have been about him. And for the first time since their breakup, reality hit him with full force. He hadn't just lost her. He had lost everything. Natalie had become untouchable, and he was nothing more than a cautionary tale of failure and self-destruction. So, like the pathetic, desperate man he was, he tried to crawl back. He sent a message. Not an apology. Not a confession of guilt. But an offer. Natalie, I've been thinking a lot lately. I know I messed up. I shouldn't have let my parents interfere, and I definitely should never have let things get so out of control. I was immature. But I've been working on myself. I've been reflecting. And I think we owe it to ourselves to have one last conversation. Just to see if there's anything left between us. Natalie stared at the message for less than 5 seconds before deleting it. She didn't need to reply. Because he already knew the answer. The business summit was held at one of the most prestigious venues in the city, a place where only the elite gathered. The kind of place Curtis had once dreamed of stepping into as a respected name. Natalie arrived with calm confidence, her presence commanding attention the moment she walked in. She wasn't just another participant, she was a leader, a rising force in the industry. And Curtis? He was there too. Not as an invited guest. Not as a speaker. But as an unemployed nobody, desperately trying to network his way back into relevance. He spotted Natalie from across the room, his expression shifting from shock to disbelief to something dangerously close to hope. He made his way toward her, past industry leaders, past successful entrepreneurs, people who would have once given him the time of day, but who now barely spared him a glance. And then, just as he was about to reach her, another man stepped into the space beside her. A man Curtis recognized instantly. Ethan Parker. A man who had everything Curtis had ever wanted. An Ivy League graduate. A co-founder of one of the fastest-growing investment firms in the country. A man with wealth, status, and power. And most importantly, a man standing beside Natalie, speaking to her like an equal. Curtis froze, his stomach twisting into knots. Because in that moment, he understood. Natalie wasn't just doing better without him. She had stepped into a world he would never be able to reach. He was nothing now. And she? She was untouchable. Curtis never spoke to Natalie again after that night. Maybe he finally understood that there was no way back. Or maybe he simply couldn't stomach seeing the life she had built without him. Either way, it didn't matter. Because Natalie had moved on long before he did. She never once looked back. Because there was nothing left behind worth looking at. Curtis had lost everything, his reputation, his job, and any hope of ever re-entering Natalie's world. But some men don't know when to quit. Some men, when faced with the consequences of their own actions, don't take responsibility. Instead, they lash out, grasping at anything, refusing to accept that they are the architects of their own downfall. Curtis was one of those men. And that made him dangerous. Natalie had expected silence from him after the business summit, but instead, she received something else entirely, a lawsuit. A frivolous, baseless lawsuit, filed against her for emotional distress, defamation, and financial damages. The moment her lawyer sent her the documents, she laughed out loud. Curtis had the audacity to claim that her actions had caused him to lose his job, suffer public humiliation, and experience financial instability. He alleged that she had unlawfully interfered with his career, that she had manipulated social media against him, that she had turned his industry contacts against him. In short, he was claiming that his own self-destruction was somehow her fault. But here was the most laughable part: he was suing her for $500,000. The desperation reeked from the pages. This wasn't just a last-ditch effort to get something out of her. It was an act of pure spite. A weak, pathetic attempt to drag her into one last battle, hoping that even if he couldn't win, he could at least exhaust her, cost her money, force her into a settlement. But Curtis had made a critical mistake. Because Natalie didn't settle. She didn't back down. And she certainly didn't lose. Natalie had spent months fighting back against Curtis's pettiness, his smear campaigns, his entitled delusions. But now she had the legal system on her side. Her lawyer, an aggressive and highly accomplished litigation expert, immediately filed a motion to dismiss the case. The evidence was overwhelmingly in her favor. Every single claim Curtis made was not only unfounded but easily disprovable. He claimed she had cost him his job. Her lawyer submitted evidence that Curtis had been fired due to his own misconduct, including internal emails and HR reports from his previous company detailing his unprofessional behavior. He claimed she had spread false information about him. Her team provided records proving that he himself had started the smear campaign against her, with forensic tracking linking the anonymous accounts back to his devices. He claimed she had manipulated social media against him. Screenshots, witness statements, and digital footprints all confirmed that Curtis had tried to fabricate a false narrative, only for it to backfire when the truth came out. He claimed financial damages. His bank records were subpoenaed. And what did they show? That he had already been in financial ruin long before their breakup. His spending habits, gambling debts, and reckless financial decisions proved that Natalie had nothing to do with his downfall. Within weeks, Curtis's case fell apart. The judge didn't just dismiss the lawsuit, he sanctioned Curtis for filing a frivolous claim, forcing him to pay for all of Natalie's legal fees. But Natalie wasn't done yet. Because now it was her turn to go on the offensive. Natalie wasn't just going to walk away from this. Curtis had spent months trying to destroy her career, her reputation, her peace of mind. And now, he was going to pay for it. Her legal team immediately filed a countersuit. Defamation, for the false accusations he had spread online. Harassment, for the repeated attempts to contact and manipulate her. Emotional distress, for the calculated efforts to ruin her professional life. Punitive damages, because he had acted with clear malice and intent to harm. Curtis, now already drowning in legal debt, had no way out. He tried to fight it at first, hiring a cheap, second-rate lawyer who tried to argue that he had simply been expressing his opinions. But Natalie's legal team shredded that argument apart. His opinions had been presented as facts, false, malicious claims designed to deliberately harm her. His opinions had caused real financial and professional consequences, as evidenced by the testimonies from her employers and colleagues. His opinions were a direct attack, one that he had orchestrated with full intent. He had no defense. The case never even made it to trial. Curtis was forced to settle. And not just with an apology. Not just with a public retraction. But with money. Natalie walked away with a six-figure settlement, paid directly from what little savings and assets Curtis had left. It was a financial death sentence for him. And for Natalie? It was poetic justice. After the lawsuit, Curtis disappeared from public view. He had no job. No credibility. No industry left that would take him. His social media accounts were deactivated. His former friends and colleagues cut ties completely. The last Natalie ever heard of him? He had moved back to his parents' home in that tiny rural town he had once been so eager to escape. A grown man, defeated, living in his childhood bedroom, utterly humiliated. He had spent so much time trying to destroy her, trying to take what wasn't his, trying to make her pay. But in the end, he was the only one who lost. And Natalie? She didn't just survive. She won. Natalie had won. Not just in the courtroom, not just against Curtis, but in every sense that truly mattered. She had walked through the fire, endured betrayal, public humiliation, and relentless attacks, yet she had emerged stronger than ever. No longer the woman who had once tiptoed around a man's insecurities. No longer someone who dimmed her own light to make someone else feel more comfortable. She was finally free, and she intended to make the most of it. For the first time in years, there was no shadow looming over her, no crisis waiting to unfold. Just her ambitions, and an open road ahead. And she wasted no time making up for all the moments she had lost. Her career, already on the rise, skyrocketed. With Curtis out of the picture, she threw herself into her work without restraint. She took on high-stakes projects, closed major deals, and positioned herself as one of the most promising young professionals in her industry. She no longer second-guessed herself, no longer held back. If an opportunity arose,